Hi, I'm Mackenzie. This is my visual project for week 14 on woman versus man versus bug and poisons in the field. So I started off with some illustrations. The first one isn't really about the thesis of the article, it's more about what inadvertently came from Carson's work and how we discussed that some of the gender barriers were intermingled. Like, for example, on the man's side, I drew a man with an axe chopping down a tree because it was seen as masculine to dominate nature, which is one of the reasons that the idea of nature and humans being as one was almost a little offensive to many, was because it was seen as more feminine than masculine, because it wasn't coinciding with their ideas of dominating. And then on the women's side, I have a family tree. Not very creative, but that's okay. And this little green squiggle is supposed to be like pesticides entering the family tree, because a lot of the women were concerned with how pesticides could affect their children, their unborn children, their breast milk, etc., essentially entering the human body. But this was seen as more of a feminine environmental issue because, as you kind of talked about in the lecture video, the idea of the ecology and the pesticides penetrating into the family tree is typically a feminine kind of idea. Any kind of that, you know what I'm talking about. And then so this illustration was basically just to say there was a manly idea of ecology and environmentalism, and there was a feminine idea. And when this work came out, one of the reasons it was disruptive is because it kind of blended the barrier between those two. And then next I get more into the thesis that the author presents, which here we have that scientists cannot fix the problem, as Carson really liked to assert. So I don't know what she looked like, but I just put her in a little bun and a lab coat, and she's kind of rejecting this scientist dude. And that was another reason that these ideas were disruptive and upsetting to some, was because also, as you talked about in your lecture video, us STEM students even don't like to believe that we can't fix something. There's a little bit of an ego there. So in the science community, they didn't like the idea of not being able to fix something themselves, especially something that seems so scientifically involved, such as pesticides, chemicals, etc. So then next, my last little illustration is more about Carson's and the author's ideas about nature, especially how Carson in particular said that human beings are one with nature and they should not and cannot try to dominate it, which I guess this isn't an accurate picture, but it was just what I thought of to portray it. Not very good at art on the iPad, but it just says man should not try to dominate nature right here on the bottom. And then it's a dude and he's a little frightened because I tried to make it like a Venus flytrap, I don't know, but basically it's not saying that nature can fight back or anything like that. It's just to illustrate you should not try to dominate nature, because that's not what it's about. And then on this side I have a quote that says, "Our homes, health, and gardens are part of the natural world," which is what the belief of Carson was. So I don't know, he's got some like vines on him and some flowers around him. Basically this is just supposed to be a general illustration of the gist I got of the view of nature, which is being involved with humans instead of being separated and dominated by humans, and also the idea that it in fact should not be dominated or even attempted. And then if I move down, I have some quotes by classmates. So Erin Dwelly first said, I might paraphrase this a little, it shows the gender separation that this article is talking about by making the lady big and more like a man, but they made the man more feminine to represent a lady. They made him petite and look helpless. And Erin says he's not saying ladies are helpless, but in this cartoon, it plays a part in switching gender roles, which I really liked what he said there, because it's not just saying, oh, they made the lady scary and they made the man helpless. It's saying they switched gender roles to portray a certain image, a scary one, and a persuasive one about the ideas that these environmentalists, the new ones, Carson, and the people concerned about pesticides were putting out there. So I just commented that they're making the lady masculine to dehumanize her, but they're making the man feminine for sympathy in that picture, the illustration. And then Melody King said, typically females are represented as petite and passive beings, while males are represented as strong and dominant, but in the drawing, the female is masculine, monstrous, and hysterical. She's dressed in housewife attire, even though Carson is an example, although she was not necessarily the specific person in the drawing. Carson was a scientist putting out these ideas, but they portrayed the lady in a housewife attire instead, which is a little disrespectful of her role. And then Melody goes on to say that the male is portrayed as respectable and sane, symbolized by a doctor's uniform. So again, even though a lot of the people who were arguing against the pesticides and such were scientists, even the women, this was not portrayed in the comic because it helps to de-rationalize their point of view, I guess. And then it says, this further pushes the societal norm that men are the only sane ones in positions of power, which, again, I would agree with, because the drawing is the man looking sane and like he is defending himself, while the lady is looking monstrous and she is on the attack. She's on the offensive, which makes her look, insane and hysterical, and they actually pushed that these women were hysterical. And so I commented that scientists didn't like hearing that they couldn't fix it, even though it was from another scientist, like Carson, who said scientists cannot fix the problem. Even though she was a scientist herself, this idea was still offensive to those people who want to believe that they can indeed fix this. And then I also added that men didn't like the feminine portrayal of nature. It downplayed their masculinity, and they didn't like the women breaking through in the field either. So again, the masculine view of nature was one of dominating nature and being in control of it, not as being one with it. Whereas Carson believed that nature is a part of our lives, it is a part of us, we are a part of nature, we are not separate from it, which made the idea feminine and less appealing to these, the men and the scientists who argued against her. And then Sophia said that, once again, they labeled her as hysterical, angry housewife. And then this was the biggest part that I liked about what she said was, or what she mentioned from the article, which was that she was portrayed as having a mystical attachment to the balance of nature. So again, that's diving in that the way nature is viewed can be offensive to those who want to still feel. It's like they're assigning gender roles to the way that they treat nature. And so to have a different view of it, something that strays out of the gender roles, it was a mystical attachment to the balance of nature, because it was not unheard of, but just not well accepted at the time, because that was not how they believed environmentalism should be treated. And it says, they discredited her biology background and compared her to a witch that only wanted to hurt corporations. I also liked that part because I think that the corporations and the economy played a big deal in them not wanting to actually make changes or listen to these women, which I will also get to. when I'm discussing the second work. But basically, if your ideas and your thoughts go against the corporations and the economy and the big people, then you're already kind of in an impossible situation. And it says, or she said, America views the environment that one must be more powerful or controlling than the other. And for the feminine to gain power, the implication is that the masculine must lose it and then compensate somehow. And so he visualized that in his drawing by depicting the woman as much larger than the man. And so, of course, the author went over that in the article, but I think it is also an important part because it is saying that, kind of, I guess, to put it bluntly, the men are seeing it as a threat to their power, and which is a power they're used to holding, because if these females get what they want, and then they're gaining a sort of power that the men have to give up, and the men have to admit that the ladies were right somehow, and so that is also an offensive idea to them. And I'm gonna change the paper real quick to be like this. There we go. And then I commented on it that they don't like the idea of us being attached to nature because they feel like they have to dominate nature and women. That's how they hold their power. It's not an attachment, it's a domination and a kind of controlling relationship is how they feel it should be balanced out. And it says, I just commented also, they don't like how she targets corporations because I wanted to remind myself to speak on that part because I thought that was pretty important. And so for the second work this week, I have a couple more illustrations and also just one quote from a classmate. So I put right here this little guy, and he represents the mainstream environmentalists, as I wrote there, and he's saying these are my priorities, and I have legislation protecting the natural environment and protecting wildlife, while the farm workers, who are also having environmental goals that are tied with their societal goals, are saying, I think you forgot these, which is the health of minorities and legislation that serves minorities. And then I wrote this guy just saying LOL no, because as we read in the work, and as I will touch on more later, the views of these farm workers and Latino communities were very much downplayed, and oftentimes the environmentalists would not care about the concerns of the Latino farm workers unless it also affected wildlife and nature. So I just made a couple bullet points right here that the USDA spent $132 million on research and development, but only $160,000 to ensure that pesticides would not would meet federal safety standards, which is, very applicable to the Latino farm workers who were experiencing negative symptoms and getting sick. And I also said that they would support for impacts on nature and wildlife, but not for impacts on minorities. So I will touch on this more later as well, but basically these mainstream environmentalists served mostly the middle white class, but also generally white people and middle class, upper class people. And so these people of a different class and a different ethnicity were not a priority to them. And then my third bullet point is class and ethnic divisions, lack of continuous support, because the author really drilled it home in their thesis that these farm workers, I didn't mean to do that. The reason they were not getting anywhere was because, one, their class and ethnic divisions made it so that they were excusable, they could be brushed to the side. People didn't really care about what they had to say or their health. And also they had a lack of continuous support for this. So the Sierra Club and other big mainstream environmentalist groups did not support these people. And if they did, it was for short periods of time, which, for example, the oil workers, I think I touch on that later, the oil workers, the Sierra Club decided to support them for a bit, mostly to better their image, not to actually support the oil workers. But then we read in the article that there were a lot of complaints received then from middle-class white people who didn't want to be helping these workers out. And then here I have a little diagram where in the article it said 71% of the farm workers displayed symptoms of pesticide poisoning. So that's just kind of, I guess, a visual representative of just how many of them were experiencing negative side effects, yet still their voices were downplayed. And this is my last illustration. There's this guy at Vons, and he's looking at the grapes and lettuce bins, and there's none, and he's saying, bro, where are the lettuce and the grapes? Because we learned about how they boycotted. And then over here, I don't know what the squiggling around it is, but these are supposed to be the farm workers and the Latino farm workers who were experiencing negative symptoms, negative side effects, who were getting sick, who were concerned about the effects of pesticides on their communities. And these people are just kind of walking around, they're happy, they're just focused on themselves, and they're saying, I hope the animals are okay, because they can see the plight of these Latino farm workers, but as we learned, they don't really care. And I have a last little diagram right here that's about class and ethnicity, and I put an important versus not important. I wrote meh for it. So obviously the most important people to them were the middle class white people, but of course the white people would be important at least some level all the time. So I even did a divide in the lower class ranks where the white people were still important if they were lower class, but the other ethnicities were not so much. And then in the ethnicity triangle over here, I put white, animals, and other, because even though animals are not an ethnicity, they were still cared about more and prioritized over the Latino farm workers who were actively voicing their concerns. And I put a little quote from what Lucille said, and I quoted her saying, "The mainstream environmental movement has historically been a movement focused mainly on middle white America. Although the mainstream environmental movement has been historically and currently important, it has often overlooked issues which do not affect the Americans which this movement targets. In addition, it has often overlooked the root of many environmental issues, capitalism." And I just commented, it serves itself and nothing else is prioritized. So, again, the UFW did not succeed very much. They had small successes, but they were not enough because they would not receive continuous support, because their class and ethnicity divide made them less important to these people. And then the author also kind of drilled it home that mainstream environmentalism did not serve a broad umbrella, I guess you could say, of environmental problems. It only served the ones that directly affected either the people they cared about, or animals, or nature. But if it was an environmental issue affecting such as the Latino farm workers, then it was not really an issue to them. So that was what I had to say about the second piece, and then the first piece, of course, was about how it kind of accidentally warped some gender roles. Carson said that scientists cannot fix the problem, that we are one with nature and we should not try to dominate it. So I tried to show all of these in my little illustrations, and I thought it was interesting to share some of the things that my classmates said. So yeah, that was my visual project for week 14 once again. Thank you, Justine, and hopefully this uploads tonight.